I'm Mark Bennett. I was the Green Business Officer for Dublin City Council, and I guess I believe in IoT and smart cities so much that I've taken a career break to pursue a startup in the area. I take a very positive view of smart cities. I think it's a great opportunity for us all. And I think I might ask Philip first to explain maybe what IoT is, and also how do you apply IoT to create smart cities, but particularly in a city like Dublin, which has established ways of doing things and is a heritage city.
Yeah, it's this IoT phrase, it's thrown around so often that you start to become immune to it and regard it as some kind of odd concept. The overnight sensation that is supposedly IoT is, as usual, a nonsense. It's been around for decades. I would argue that the first IoT instance of note was the Apollo program. We had a thing, and that thing was smart. In fact, a lot of the computing capabilities we now take for granted were built for that program. A lot of the connectivity capabilities we have were built for that program. So there was a thing called Apollo. It was smart and it was connected. Other than the time on the dark side of the moon, it was connected. So smart connected things ain't new. They've been around for a long time. It's just you needed to be the wealthiest country on the planet to engage with it. And then you go forward another decade and large manufacturing machines like the Intel fabs that I grew up in, where you spend $5 billion, the return on investment was such that we could spend on the intelligence and the connectivity in that kind of environment. And then it became Boeing engines and big cars. And the beauty of this overnight sensation of IoT that's tipping all of a sudden is that it's been around for a long time. It's just hit the price point and the security and manageability point where it can go huge. And it's not just my workplace, it's my living room. So it's kind of cool that it's happening. I think this is, we all, I know, collectively feel really privileged to be in this kind of, to have this opportunity at this time window, and particularly privileged that we're not making this shit up as we go along. We know how to do this stuff. So for smart cities specifically, Mark, it's, I guess, more than half the population now live in cities. It's where we're growing up. It's where we're living. It's where we're getting educated. It's where we're working. It's where we socialize. It's where we sleep. It's where we eat. So why not make it intelligent? And the old infrastructure that you refer to, Mark, again, we've solved that in large places before. We didn't throw away engines on aircraft to make them smart. We bolted on smart connectivity. We're not going to throw away your house. Maybe you want your house thrown away, but you don't necessarily have to trash it. You don't have to raise it to the ground in order to make it intelligence. You can bolt intelligence and connected intelligence into your facility in the form of a kettle or in the form of a living room.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how you go from the IoT of a clean room to the IoT of Temple Bar, for example.
Can I just add to that a little bit? Because at Cisco we sort of extended that term. When everybody else was calling it IoT, we decided to call it IOE just to be different. but really there is a sense to that. We're using the term less and less now. But IOE is really about the Internet of everything. Right, and it gives you a grander scale, a bigger sense. But it's also important because it's not just simply talking about things like the sensors. It's also talking about the people and the processes and the data behind it. Because it's one thing to have a whole heap of sensors generating enormous amounts of data at a really phenomenal scale. But if you can't actually determine insights from that data, it's of little relevance to anybody.
Yeah. And, if you have those insights and they're coming in and you're managing the city, responsively, and not to have the dystopian future of what if it all goes wrong, but what happens if something starts to go wrong? I mean, what are the fail-safes that you put in?
Well, I've been 30 years in this industry, and one thing you learn actually over that time is you've got to be optimistic, right? Because there is so much change. Change just comes rapidly, and particularly when you work for a large company like Cisco, which is acquiring other companies at a phenomenal rate, 185 at the last count, right? So there is a lot of things happening all of the time. So, but what happens if it does go wrong? Well, clearly, if somebody hacks into your watch or your fridge, it's not a big thing, right? But if somebody disrupts the power system or the water or the transportation, well, suddenly, things actually do start to fall apart. But like our belief is that what you need to do is you need to actually design in security right from the start. Okay, it can't be an afterthought. It has to be something that where you take a standards-based approach, you take an architectural approach, and you look at the whole thing from end to end. And just to give you a little bit more context, and Philip said it very well in terms of the numbers of people who live in cities, but some numbers around that. It's estimated that about 60 million people actually move into cities every year, right? So, and then approximately about 60% of the world's population live in cities. And they live in an area which is about 2% of the world's surface. And that 2% is using 75% of the resources. So when you put all that together, you can see the enormity of the challenge. We have no option but to make our cities smart, because without that, we're going to have incredible challenges that we just won't be able to solve.
Which is actually a very good lead into the question I wanted to ask Karl, is with all of those numbers of people and trying to, in a way, give those resources equally to all citizens and stakeholders and for the purposes of democracy, etc., you kind of need to know where people are and what they're doing and give them access. And the company that you've set up is looking at using ECGs, for example, as authentication. Maybe you could explain?
Right. So we make wearable authentication. So this is our first product, the NIMI band, which uses the electrocardiogram to authenticate identity. But it's not so much about the biometric. It's the idea that you could have something on you that persistently establishes trust that it's you, and then can have this sort of passive connection to things around you that is both secure and privacy protective. It's an enabler because we look at people are things in the context of the Internet of Things, and we look at people as that first mile, right? First mile of connection to that rest of that ecosystem. And we need trust amongst all the things. And so we're looking at the first mile of trust. This is who they say they are, so they can connect with the services that they have a rightful access to, and to make sure the authenticity of data and all of that. But it has to work in this context of hyperconnectivity. The fact that today I have to use all these tools, passwords, pins, tokens, over and over and over again, literally hundreds of times a day to prove who I am. It seems like centuries behind this sort of hyperconnectivity. So our view is that has to be convenient, secure, privacy protective. So our approach is just make it persistent, put it on the body, and then add layers on top of that to enable the experiences that people want to have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. Bay, perhaps I could come to you. All of this data that's flying around and all of these systems that are being put in, and some are proprietary, some aren't. But on a city side, what I've seen over the last 6 years working in the city is there's this presumption, even at an EU level, towards open data and non-proprietary systems. Do you have an opinion on that? I noticed also that you're sometimes based in Hong Kong. Is there a different approach to this in different jurisdictions?
Sure. So I came from San Francisco, and I think it wasn't probably 4 to 5 years ago where the mayor's office opened up all that data and said, let's let the developers start hacking away, and let's give them the information they need to create the experiences for the users of the city, the way they want it. And it's a perfect city to try that in. But I think if you look at what's been happening in the EU, it's been really inspiring, and moving to Hong Kong, where they have some really interesting, we talk about connected cities. It's the densest city on earth, arguably. It has an unbelievable rate. Something like 75 or 80% of people use public transit on a daily basis. Almost no one uses a car. It was designed as a cashless city from day one. It was all meant to be via digital means. So it's certainly not new. I think the open area, I'd probably argue someone from the Cisco side or someone on the larger corporation side has to probably worry about that more. But I do think that there's some real merit to allowing the users of the city, the people that live in that city, to participate. And I think San Francisco did a really good job. It was something as small as the bike community actually had a fantastic program where it would track the users, but the users could actually help develop the software too. So help show the city the problems with the bike lanes, the issues, the congestion, the areas that were dangerous. And I think you just have to make sure that the people that live in those cities have a way to participate. I think that's really important, and whether that's through open data or other means, I think it's probably a great start. I would argue that most of the innovation is probably not going to come from the government level, at least on the development side. I think they can generally enact policy and be certainly supportive. But I would doubt, or probably argue for everyone here, that you're probably not going to see the most innovative technology coming out of the government sector. I think it's their job just to sort of lubricate the developers in the local community.
Yeah, I echo that from the city side. I think what we've seen is that sometimes you build, something that you build is shiny at the beginning and then rusts very quickly because you just don't have the manpower really to be able to update it to the extent that you need to. And what we're trying to do in the city is to create the enabling environment to help other people do it.
I had the great fortune to be in San Francisco on Friday, right? Nice. And I cycled across the Golden Gate.
Nice.
So I'm a big fan. But I'd like to raise another very important point, and it's not an us and them. It's not between big corporations and smaller companies. It's absolutely not. In order for this new world to really happen and come about and transform people for the better, it's all about ecosystems, in my view. It's about us actually in larger corporations forging relationships with all manner of companies, be they big and small, because the inevitability of what we're trying to do here is that nobody has the full extent of the solution from start to finish.
Well, I think earlier to your point around what happens if it goes wrong, I think it's, in some way, you hear this all the time with IoT. It's all about security, security, security. And actually, the talk with Slack just recently, they said their 50th employee, which you never hear, was actually about policy and enforcement of security in a company, which you wouldn't normally hear in a 50-person startup. But I don't think this is new, like the power grids, the water systems. I mean, we all have seen Hackers and all these great movies. I mean, this is not like it's going to all of a sudden happen because we have toasters and watches connected to the internet. This stuff already exists. It's already vulnerable, and the normal way that technology is vulnerable. It's not going to all of a sudden become a whole lot more vulnerable because you connect your toaster, your bed, your shoes, your glasses. So I think it's something that's already existed, so open data is critical in terms of trying to figure out what's the balance. I'm certainly not on the deeper side of that to understand, but I know that from the consumer side, you certainly want to have a voice and make sure that you can participate to some extent. But I don't think that's the security element of IoT or IoE is all of a sudden new. It's certainly not different than it's been for decades.
Yeah, it's odd how so many smart city conversations or IoT or tech conversations roll into Terminator.
Yeah.
It's just, what's wrong with you people? We're wired for robotics and technology to somehow be, frightening, and it, unfortunately, and actually San Fran's an interesting example for, I'm sure many in here have been there. One of the things that, how can, 7 million people, 0.1% of the population be responsible for such a large percentage of the technology breakthroughs? Well, that's widely acknowledged, but even more interestingly, the business model breakthroughs of the planet, and it's a mindset. And a lack of fear of the unknown. Now, you can't take it for granted, but I don't know, have many of you ever done a credit card transaction? I suspect so, right? So guess what? You put your credit card information and a number, in my case small, in your case large, right? But you put a number on there and you transmitted it through a system that's accessible and listenable to. That's the world we live in, and we have long since had methodologies through encryption keys that you use, Karl, extensively. We have methods for making sure your credit card's safe. So we don't want to lose ourselves in this. And I think as a citizen of a country, we should be required to present lots of our data openly. I think it should be necessary for me to, give up my heart rate data.
That's a fabulously quotable
here's the contribution. Here's what I won't give you, Mark. Don't attach my name to it. But you can certainly do, there's certain aspects of the open data that I want to keep private, but why not anonymize the data and allow smart people to go interrogate those databases and find, breakthroughs on, my appalling eating habits and how, that can be resolved based on real data or not. So it ain't scary. And there's enough systems in place, there have been for a long time, to make it secure. We need to be healthily paranoid, but don't allow that to get in the way of the extraordinary opportunity that is IoT generally and smart cities specifically.
I like what Bay is saying there about empowering the citizen, and I think then if you have multiple people attacking the problem at different angles, you get kind of a strength in diversity. But then you might lose a bit of the efficiency where you have kind of a common platform. So there's always that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, I think that the flip side of that, which we think about privacy a lot, which is really about control. Privacy is not about secrecy. It's about the fact that people have control over their information. And I think it's important to note that there is a bit of a collision of worlds happening right now where the scope of the impact of making mistakes can be severe. So we do have to think about, how, when data is put out onto a network more broadly, what is the impact of that? I mean, trust in the old model of non-connected devices if you look at the old style of an electrical meter, trust is assumed because it's attached to the side of a building and somebody has to go there and read it. But now you put that on a network, you actually don't necessarily know where it is and what's the security model there and what's the private information that's disseminating onto a network. And so I think it's important that there is a collision of worlds and there is a right and wrong way to do it. We shouldn't be scared of it, but always put the user in control first of their information.
I think that might be a nice quote also to end on. Can I thank Karl, Bay, Philip, and Adam for very insightful contributions. Thanks very much. Thank you.